Sunday, October 26, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is a public defender, activist, and author. Her book on the criminal court system and smarter public safety solutions, called The Price of Mercy, will be published in February and is available for pre-order now. Emily Galvin Almanza, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Firstly, I just want to say that you and I have been working together with you doing some brilliant explainer videos on the 5 Minute News channel, and I'm so grateful to you for that. People really need to know, certainly from a legal perspective, with your experience as a public defender, amongst other things, how to kind of handle themselves in this strange new world. And it really is that, isn't it? That there has been a seismic shift in the way society operates because they're seeing memes of their neighbors being manhandled and disappeared. Just talk to the new reality for Trump's America.
You know, it's interesting. My subject matter is the law. I mean, obviously, I'm a lawyer. That's what I know. That's what I talk about. And there's been a lot of reaction at times when I'm talking to friends or explaining some legal concept that seems relevant to the present moment where rights are being eroded or ignored. And they say, well, the law doesn't matter anymore. The administration's not following the law. So none of this is relevant. Why do we have to talk about it? It's just everybody's blowing it off. And I have to say that's really not true. That's an overly cynical, overly pessimistic interpretation of what's happening right now and what we're seeing in the landscape more broadly. On the streets, we are seeing lawlessness by law enforcement. We are seeing clear abuses of power by federal law enforcement. Specifically, we're seeing a lot of really horrifying videos of ICE in particular, violating people's civil rights. And we're seeing attempts by the administration to abrogate, ignore, or entirely erase the concept of due process. But we're not seeing the same thing from the courts. Largely, we are seeing the courts shut this down. And yes, one can point out that when things get to the Supreme Court, at this moment in history, there's an awful lot of sympathy for the executive at the Supreme Court, but not every case can make it to the Supreme Court. There's a limited number of cases that those 9 justices can hear and adjudicate. And so my expectation is it's actually now more than ever that we need to know what our rights are and how to enforce those rights and how to defend ourselves and litigate. I mean, looking out at the broader landscape of civil rights violations, if we were to see every single person right now who is eligible, who has sufficient factual basis to file a civil rights suit against federal law enforcement actually do so, it would be a sheer volume of civil rights litigation that I do not think could be completely shut down by the Supreme Court. I think a lot of people would see a lot of success on those claims. And I think that as a disincentive to misconduct, litigation, especially litigation on matters where police have gone so far outside, and by police, I'm including all forms of ICE, law enforcement, let's say law enforcement actors have gone so far outside the bounds of what is defensible official conduct that they could become even personally liable for their actions. That's a major disincentive to people being brutal in the streets. So, yeah, now's the time to talk about civil rights.
Part of the issue, as I see it, is that people who are caught up in a kind of street situation where ICE are present and ICE are either indiscriminately kind of looking for people, racially profiling them, as they've now been given authority to do by the Supreme Court, but others who are trying to protect them because they're friends, neighbors, or just, members of citizens of society who get in the way are often being arrested too. And these invariably are Americans and not, legal citizens and people who ultimately, have every right to do that. But what seems to have changed is if you put your hand on somebody, then we're hearing this a lot from the regime. If you put your hand on somebody or raise your voice, I mean, there was one guy who played the Darth Vader Imperial March soundtrack whilst ICE were moving around, and he got arrested and detained. So what has changed in terms of people's rights and the executive with ICE taking advantage of that? Because, I mean, they do have a quota for arrests, and it does seem like they're just going for anybody who gets in their way.
So I need to be really clear about this. Nothing has changed with regard to what rights people have. And what you're describing, we often say in my field, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. Which means that in the moment, on the ground, when you are facing a completely unjustifiable arrest, you can't stop that from happening. It is not within our power as citizens to stop law enforcement from unlawfully apprehending us and taking us somewhere. However, you can litigate that. You can, I mean, we're seeing most people who've been wrongfully detained whose cases I have followed have been released fairly immediately.
Right.
That does not mean they don't have a cause of action. I mean, obviously, the horror and trauma of being publicly and brutally and violently arrested and taken to a detention center is actionable when it is carried out with no lawful basis. And to be clear, filming the police, speaking out against the police, insulting the police. You can't threaten violence against the police, but you can use the F word. I mean, that's within our rights as Americans. And so we're seeing right now a lot of people who can't beat the ride. But we're also seeing a lot of people who, if sufficient legal resources are put at their disposal, and that's a crucial point, if there are sufficient people out there who are going around saying, I'm a civil rights lawyer, let me take your case. Or, I'm not a civil rights lawyer, I'm a partner at a big firm, let me take your case.
Yeah.
We're seeing people who could beat the rap and who could create a form of accountability for this misconduct that nobody else is going to create. Because the government is not going to police itself. DOJ, the Civil Rights Division is not coming to anyone's rescue right now. So we're really going to have to let, essentially, like the free market of litigation create the consequences that we believe are important to create incentives for good behavior among armed law enforcement.
Another caveat to this, though, is that some people don't believe that these officers really are who they say they are. Yeah. Because they're either not identifying themselves properly, their uniform looks like it's come from Amazon, they are masked, unless they're in California now, where I think an executive order was passed where they have to show their faces, although I don't know that they're all sticking to that. And this is the problem. I mean, a lot of these ICE federal agents, a lot of them just look like kind of Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, white supremacists on the hunt. I mean, that's even more terrifying, isn't it?
It is, but I don't want us to narrow the problem. I mean, by assuming that that's who these people are. First of all, I completely agree that without identification, there is no way to know if the person in front of you is a kidnapper or federal law enforcement. Yeah. We don't know. It is completely reasonable for the citizenry to treat these encounters as unreliable and, as potentially civilian criminal, misconduct, as long as our federal government refuses to create a way for ICE to be legitimately identifiable. And that, to me, is a crucial point, because it's not just about the safety of the citizenry, of the civilians. It's also about the safety of these officers. Because if you're out there and you have no way to prove that you are not a kidnapper, you have no way to prove that you're not conducting criminal activity, that puts you ultimately in a dangerous position. So there does need to be some way to make these folks identifiable. That, of course, goes to accountability as well, right? People can be much more extreme in their behavior when they know that they are unidentifiable and unsuable, because it's very, very hard to figure out who they are and name them in a complaint. But there's something more too. ICE has created the kind of incentives for joining their ranks that the Republican Party flipped out about when the Biden administration tried to do it. Student loan forgiveness, right?
Right.
Huge bonuses. And yeah, we're hearing about quotas as well, which is a really just immoral concept when you think about it. It's just money for collecting bodies of your fellow man. that is drawing in a lot of people who might not be actually that ideologically aligned with ICE's mission. It's drawing in a lot of people who just are broke.
Yes.
Just really need a job. This is not a great job market right now. There's a great book I just read by Gene Ludwig called The Mismeasurement of America, talking about how even our most reliable federal data dramatically underestimates the scale of the problem when it comes to low wages, high unemployment, and a dollar going less far today than it went 20 years ago. So you're seeing a lot of people who might have affinity with the community they are attacking and policing. But they're in these jobs because it is expedient and they are incentivized to do so financially.
Yes, there's been like very large sums suggested, like $50,000 signups, although some of that has gone quiet now. And we're also hearing that a lot of the applicants have not been able to pass the physical test, doing the sit-ups and the push-ups and running the distance.
It's not even that many, I have to say. It's like not that many.
So they've had to lower the standard, right? They've lowered the standard.
And they're seeing people showing up for training who haven't been fully vetted. I mean, it's like the HR side of ICE seems like a real mess. I do want to point out one interesting highlight, though, on the protection piece, the like protection of civilians piece, which is there was an article this week in which, the headline was Nancy Pelosi saying that police can arrest ICE officers. But what really happened was that San Francisco DA Brooke Jenkins indicated that she was ready to hold ICE officers accountable for misconduct that happens in the streets of San Francisco. And she was ready to ask the San Francisco Police Department to enforce California law, even against federal law enforcement. Now, this is obviously like, we'll see if it actually happens kind of a thing. But what's very interesting to me is we're a country plagued by law enforcement violence. I mean, we've been talking about this forever, but there was a real groundswell of activity on this since 2020. And since the series, we talk about George Floyd, but it's really a series of murders of Black and brown men and children and women and, Breonna Taylor. We obviously have a very long history of law enforcement who is not held to the same standards of conduct as you or I. So what's interesting to me about this move is we might be at a moment where the brutality of ICE is so pronounced that prosecutors who ordinarily would not really with great frequency have held law enforcement accountable are now beefing up their capacity to protect civilians against official misconduct. And that would be a very, very exciting move if that were to take off.
In some jurisdictions, I've noticed that certainly in California, the county sheriff's office, it has federal agents kind of working for it, doing these kind of subcontracting for ICE, but that is separate to LAPD. And so, and I've seen videos that have been made of them showing up in unmarked vehicles and doing all of that stuff. So much so that the governor, Gavin Newsom, has now decided to bring in the National Guard in California to protect Californians, certainly surrounding food banks and other support services that people need in the current financial climate. Is there a chance that we could see warfare between one department of law enforcement and another? Because the leadership of the county sheriff's department has a very different kind of ideology to that of the mayor of LA and LAPD and certainly the governor.
Let's remember that LA is also a very specific case because the long history of allegations of extreme misconduct against the sheriff's department in particular. Yeah. We are certainly in a situation where we see the potential for conflict between different branches of law enforcement. I'm going to say conflict rather than warfare, because realistically, like the way I would hope this would manifest, and I'm not hoping that it does manifest, but I'm saying if this is something we see, what I hope we would see is a show of force that results in no violence. So, for example, National Guard troops forming a wall to protect people who are trying to go in and out of a food bank, a domestic violence shelter, even the immigration courthouse, where we've had judges now issuing rulings saying that ICE cannot arrest people who are legitimately showing up to court to comply with their legal obligations. I am hoping that a show of sufficient person power and force would be enough to deter ICE from making an attempt on those individuals protected by the National Guard or whomever else might be in that position. I'm optimistic about that because we've seen instances of civilians pushing ICE out of their communities. ICE, or I should say people claiming to be ICE. Because again, we're seeing people in like Amazon costumes with like a random minivan, like masked guys in a Honda Odyssey trying to whisk someone away. And we've seen civilians raising alarms, pushing back on that, and actually driving these individuals out of their communities. So my hope is that if these individuals will at times run away from sufficient pressure by civilians, that a really meaningful line of well-trained officers saying, you will not step past this line, would actually deter them and stop short of any violent conflict.
There has actually been in California a couple of cases of people impersonating ICE officers and showing up at elementary schools. And I know that the schools have basically come together to protect students as best they can from any intervention from federal agents in this way. But the fact that people are prepared to impersonate ICE, and the fact that ICE are so easily impersonated by nature of their unprofessionalism. Yeah. I want to ask you though about this kind of top-down diktat, because when we see Donald Trump talking in such a way about people of color, about immigrants, I hate the word illegals, it's so completely offensive, but undocumented immigrants, the use of language, the rhetoric, it does cascade down to law enforcement, especially those who have an axe to grind. And certainly, and I'm using the video evidence because obviously I'm trying not to go out at the moment. I'm trying to stay safe. And this is a lesson to a lot of people. A lot of people are staying home because they don't want to accidentally get caught up in the parking lot of Home Depot with some incident. But from the video evidence that I'm seeing, it's the case that a lot of these agents, the back chat and their responses to the public is so contemptuous that they really don't care. They've been given this authority, and Trump has said out loud, you have the authority to do whatever you want. If anyone gets in your way, then they are fair game. I mean, that is a problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem, and this is why I'm talking about other forms of accountability. Because the president's rhetoric is obviously incredibly toxic on this topic, just breeding division between people, between neighbors, between family members. I mean, this has been an era of historic division, toxicity, disdain, contempt between groups of people. And I don't think there's a way to talk someone out of their contempt when they're out there in the street tasked with a violent act. And the reason I say this is it's very hard to do a violent job if you see the person you're exacting violence upon as human.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do that job if you see them as subhuman. And this is not unique to ICE. In the criminal court system, we operate under a form of what I think of as like linguistic anesthesia, right? Like judges and prosecutors and people whose job it is to incarcerate their fellow humans don't have to feel the full impact of that when they say we're sentencing the defendant to custody. Those are all euphemisms. What you mean is we're sending a young mom to Rikers Island where she's going to be held in a cold, isolated space where she can't breastfeed her newborn, right? But that specificity is really painful. And if your job every day is to ask for bail on that mom, you have to call her the defendant, the felon, the parolee, the inmate, the illegal.
Yeah. And
you have to sanitize what you're talking about with detention centers or a secure housing unit. Oh, you mean solitary confinement? You mean being locked in a box by yourself for 24 hours a day in concrete? No, it's solitary. It's the secure housing unit. It's administrative segregation. So this need to separate from the actual factual truth of what's happening and the emotion, the human emotion that comes with, because as human beings, we don't like to do that to each other. We have to dehumanize each other in order to be evil. So I don't think you can talk someone who needs that dehumanization in order to do their lucrative job, who needs that dehumanization for their $50,000 bonus. I can't talk them out of that. It's something they emotionally need. However, there's also a feeling of impunity that comes from feeling like you have the protection of the president. But here's a thing to remember. The president cannot pardon people for state offenses. So if more attorneys general followed the lead of Brooke Jenkins, and again, we'll see if she follows through, but if local states attorneys, district attorneys wanted to actually bring charges against ICE officers in their jurisdiction, the president cannot get them out of those charges.
Right.
That power is in the hands of a jury of their peers within that jurisdiction, which is a really beautiful thing, in that the power to approve of or condemn their conduct comes back into the hands of the people.
I just fear that there are enough Americans looking for work that support Trump's ideology. Because, as you say, the humanity is such that, and we hear this in the videos, people screaming, how can you do this job? You know, how can you live with yourself? How can you sleep at night? And you know, outside of the remuneration, there clearly is a kind of ideology, a political ideology there, where, you know, people of color and immigrants out, and as Stephen Miller says, America is for Americans and Americans only. And I fear that is permeating through. But you and I have spoken before about the fact that this kind of political position already exists in a lot of law enforcement, and certainly in the military.
It does. And I think that we also, like, to me, the best way to approach the discourse on people who I personally very much disagree with is to find the strongest version of their argument that I can identify with. So, for example, yeah, I'm sure a lot of them just in their personal life dehumanize immigrants. But I think there's also probably a sizable number of people who have some kind of idea in their head that they are keeping their family safe. That all of these people who are immigrants are secretly gang members or secretly an economic threat. They're taking apartments that would otherwise be rented by native, families, American families. Or that they are, undercutting wages, that our wages would be higher if people couldn't get away with paying lower wages due to the presence of people who are undocumented and therefore have less negotiating power in taking a job. Now, never mind that their anger on economic issues should probably be aimed at politicians who refuse to raise the minimum wage. Never mind that the myth of widespread gang activity or gang involvement is one that has been repeatedly disproved. I mean, articles can debunk Trend or Aragua taking over an apartment building in Aurora, Colorado as many times as they want. There are still going to be people who believe gangs are taking over our apartment buildings in our communities, and I have to go out there and do this job to keep my kids safe and to protect myself and my country. And so I want to name that because there's a very big difference between Stephen Miller's highly informed and intentionally incredibly xenophobic perspectives and the perspective of someone who is doing this job without that same level of information. I mention this because, we can have these conversations if we talk to each other. I'm a really big believer. I talk to people who really vehemently disagree with me all the time, and comparing our factual basis for our beliefs is fascinating. They can find articles that back up the idea that this apartment building was taken over. One can present mainstream media articles that debunk that, again, till the cows come home.
Yeah.
But we have to start from a place of finding the best version of our disagreement. And only when we do that can we have a meaningful conversation that can maybe start to dismantle the underpinnings of that disagreement.
Well, Trump does that himself. I mean, he has a person who follows him around with a printer, and they print off literally articles from Fox News that he waves as evidence, and that is all he is reading. He's certainly not reading security briefings. He's just reading articles from far right so-called news
I'm not sure
networks.
he's reading what he's waving. It's a prop. I don't know what's written on it. Is it like a banana bread recipe? I don't know.
Right. But it's just interesting that in real time, we're watching the disinformation play out. And disinformation and misinformation are words that we were using a lot about a year ago. But they seem to have fallen out of favor because people have got a little bit more used to this. And there is the fear, I certainly have it, that we get used to authoritarianism. And it becomes something that is normalized by nature of its frequency. Do you worry about that?
I used to, and I'll tell you, no lie, what fixed my perspective on this was clowns. Let me explain. So I worried about this a ton as we watched the ramping up of this administration. And the feeling that it was just like a blunderbuss. There was no way we could wrap our head around all of the different areas in which we were watching our country and our national identity be dismantled. And I worried people would be so overwhelmed by that fire hose of dismantlement that they would disengage and focus on daily things that give them joy in order to survive a dark time. And that to me is a key part of the slide into autocracy, is people thinking, I just have to enjoy the fall leaves and my walk to work, and I'm not going to pay attention to the news because I have to survive emotionally, psychically. And I have a friend who, she's got an amazing background in theater, like a really highly trained, incredible theatrical professional, but also highly trained clown. I mean, has really studied clowning. And she said to me when this started up, she said, keep your eye on Portland, because Portland has a culture of clowning, and clowning is going to save us. And at the time, I looked at this text message and I was like, I don't really know what she's talking about, but okay, clowns. And then I watched the joy of the Portland resistance, the frog costumes and the bagpipes and
me too.
The circus that they created, which caused us all to laugh at the authoritarians who are trying to be taken so seriously in that moment. And it spread across the country to the point where I think people lost the need to numb themselves through disengagement, because watching resistance became joyous and fun and funny. And I don't think we're going to get used to it as long as we find it funny, because at least then we're engaging with it. And that to me is my best hope. I've seen so much more meaningful action from ordinary people since the resistance became joyous.
This notion of humiliation, humiliating Trump and not taking him seriously, is something, because I watched a British news show for the first time. I haven't watched it for maybe 10 years now. I watched it on YouTube yesterday. And it's a satirical news program where they bring in weekly news stories. And the coverage of Trump was so completely different to anything we see here. They literally were crying with laughter at everything he was saying, every sentence. Then they said, show the clip of when he shakes hands with Emmanuel Macron. And there's that awful kind of push-pull moment.
Ready for him.
And the audience was bellowing with laughter, and it was just ridiculous. Full-on humiliation of a man who wears orange makeup, which doesn't meet his lips or his eyes or his sideburns.
That little temple, yeah.
But we've got used to it, and we've got used to translating his inability to speak English, and so we kind of make sense of it. We translate it on the fly. But he is ridiculous, and his regime is ridiculous. But again, the Brits are able to do it, A, because of their history of satire, but also their distance, right? They're able to kind of look on. And that isn't happening here so much. A lot of the news networks, and even comedy to a certain extent, is a little bit stuck because it is the reality here. It is a daily pox with which we are all infected.
Yeah, but they are doing it, right? Like the late night hosts have, banded together after the attack on one of their own. And we've seen innumerable people in short form videos, whether you're watching TikTok or Reels. There's one woman who posts what she calls Trump's L's for the week. And it's just her making fun of all of his ridiculous losses. I watch that because it's very concrete. It really documents where this administration is losing traction on certain issues. Yeah. I think we do it. We have a different way. Obviously, the tone of British humor and the tone of American humor are very different. But I mean, even on Saturday Night Live, look at their showcasing of Bad Bunny recently, right? Mm-hmm. Bad Bunny lands the Super Bowl gig. The right flips out because they've forgotten that Puerto Ricans are Americans, and also because he speaks Spanish and they find Spanish very scary.
Yep.
Porque no se habla en español.
Right.
Disculpa. And, oh no, I'm going to get arrested for speaking Spanish. And then we put him on SNL and showcase his talent and his humor and his warmth and highlight the ridiculousness of being afraid of someone who is from a culture that is a little bit different from many Americans. Yeah. I mean, I think this has picked up in recent weeks, and I think we're going to be seeing more and more of it as people become more courageous. I mean, the Jimmy Kimmel thing was really important because they lost.
Yes.
I mean, the amount of money that Disney lost on that one bad PR move.
But was that not the decision? Was it the revenue from, half the people that had their Disney Plus memberships and Hulu memberships cancelled, including myself? And so it was money that ultimately did it. It wasn't ideology, was it? It was
collective action. Yeah, it's money. I mean, I think that as Americans, we really underestimate the power of collective action through money. Like, we are such charming protesters. I love our signs. I love Googling like the funniest signs of No King's Day. But like, let's be clear. If we were French, we would have stopped like all traffic at an airport or something. We would have blocked a major thoroughfare. Other countries have very different ways of approaching protests that have a bigger economic hit. This was an instance, Jimmy Kimmel was an instance of Americans realizing that it is their purchasing power that allows them en masse to force change.
Right.
And I think if that lesson gets carried forward into sectors that don't have to do with streamers or entertainment, it could be a really interesting political development.
And Target had the same, didn't they? With the boycott of them over DEI, the boss quit eventually. And so I don't know whether they've brought the policies back or not, but it certainly had an effect on the management. Listen, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the retribution campaign of Trump against his former enemies, the kind of people in senior leadership and in the public eye, from John Bolton and James Comey to Letitia James and goodness knows who else, who are on the receiving end of his attacks. We'll do that next on The Weekend Show. The guys at True Classic started with a simple mission to bring premium, comfortable clothing to the masses because looking and feeling great shouldn't come with a designer price tag. And clearly, people agree. People vote with their dollars, and True Classic has sold over 25 million shirts to more than 5 million customers and racking up over 200,000 five-star reviews. This brand isn't just about fabric or fit, it's about helping guys show up every day with confidence and purpose. Their shirts fit where they should, they feel incredible, they don't break the bank, you get that tailored look without sacrificing comfort or blowing your budget. I've been wearing True Classic for a while now, and you can feel the difference the moment you throw one on. It's tailored where you want it, relaxed where you need it, no bunching, no stiff fabric, no BS, just a clean, effortless fit that actually works for real life. So, forget overpriced designer brands, skip the cheap throwaway stuff. True Classic is built for comfort, built to last, and built to give back. You can find them on Amazon, Target, Costco, Sam's Club, or head to trueclassic.com/weekend to try them out for yourself. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on the Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. Trump used the word retribution in his campaign before he even got elected. I mean, people kind of knew what he was going to do. And that has very much come true with the weaponizing of the Justice Department. The Attorney General is his former lawyer. The Deputy Attorney General is his former personal lawyer. And he is quite clearly using these people to go after people that he believes have wronged him. Not least James Comey, the former FBI director. My concern, though, and we saw James Comey make a little video at home saying, you know, I'm innocent and bring it on. Let's have a trial. And I thought, not again, James Comey. Your naivety knows no bounds. You ain't going to get a fair trial with this regime. And I don't know if you felt the same, but I you know, we've seen this with indictments and grand juries recently. I mean, it feels like, and I don't have any evidence of this, that they are handpicking grand jurists. It feels like that the corruption in the DOJ is so extreme at the highest levels, certainly with the John Bolton, James Comey, Letitia James, and various others, that there's no point in indicting them if they're not going to get the outcome that they are looking for. Would you agree with that?
No, and I'll tell you why. So there's a reason they say you can indict a ham sandwich. You do not have to handpick your grand jurors.
Right.
In the grand jury, the prosecutor has tremendous control over what evidence the grand jurors do and do not hear. Now, the rules of the game say that if the defense has exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that points towards the innocence of the accused person, and they say to the prosecutor, hey, there's this exculpatory evidence, I want you to present it to the grand jury, the prosecutor has to present it. Now, that's in the hands of the prosecutor. The defense is not there to present it. Just to nerd out for a second, what this proceeding is about making sure that when you accuse somebody of something really serious, a felony, there's a checkpoint that you have to pass through to make sure you have enough evidence that there is probable cause, probable cause meaning enough evidence to think they probably committed this felony. And in some jurisdictions, they do this through a very fair proceeding called a preliminary hearing, which is like a mini trial. The prosecution presents their evidence of probable cause. The defense has a chance to cross-examine the witnesses and contest the evidence, and then a judge decides if there's probable cause. In the grand jury, though, which is the other way of doing this, it's just the prosecutor in a room with like 20 random people. And the thing is, those 20 random people don't have to be like low-key hand-picked agents of the state. If they are just 20 ordinary people who are only being given a very specifically cherry-picked set of evidence by a prosecutor. And the reason I think that we have to focus on that is, in the Letitia James case, we see this really weird thing shaping up, which is an indication of the kind of thing I'm talking about, where she's accused of having purchased a house and told the mortgage company that this is going to be her second home, and then using it as a rental property. Whether that's something that the mortgage company should litigate civilly or an actual crime, I don't know.
And this is similar to the Lisa Cook case as well.
Yes. These are very borderline accusations.
Yes.
In the Letitia James case, the press has reported, the New York Times, I believe, reported that her niece had testified that she has lived in this house for many years paying no rent. The recent article from Lawfare suggested that the total amount of quote unquote rent might have been between $1,000 and $5,000 paid back in 2020. But certainly this is not a property that has been continually rented out to a tenant.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the reason this is key is that testimony, if Letitia James's niece says, I live here, it's a family home, my Aunt Tish comes to stay with me regularly, it really undermines the prosecutor's theory that this is secretly a rental property. And the press has reported that the niece testified to that effect. But there's no indication that she was put into the grand jury specifically that indicted A.G. James, to give that same testimony. And so what I'm saying is, if we know that exculpatory evidence exists, and if the defense had asked the prosecution to put that exculpatory evidence into the grand jury, and they didn't, and therefore got an indictment because they were only showing the grand jurors 1/3 of the picture, this is obviously a massive ethical violation on the part of the prosecution. So I'm looking at these not as instances of infiltration of the body of jurors, but rather as exploitations of little cheats in the system that could get them their desired result. I do have a tremendous amount of faith in the jury system. I don't agree with James Comey on a lot of stuff. I am not a Comey fan. I honestly don't have anything great to say about him. But I will say that I think he's right, that if you put these cases in front of a real jury in a real trial where there's a defense and the defense can cross-examine witnesses and bring their own evidence, you're not going to see convictions. My other evidence for this is under Jeanine Pirro's jurisdiction in D.C. We watched the D.C. prosecutors try 6 ways till Sunday to indict people for doing things they didn't like during federal law enforcement incursions into the district. And they could not get anybody indicted because these civilian juries were saying, we just don't think this is a valid case for whatever reason. So the jury system is beautiful in that it can become a reflection of our public values. It can also be ugly when our values are ugly. But right now we're in a moment where I think the values of the juries that these cases will go in front of are the values of people who long for constitutional due process and a national identity that values fairness and justice above all. So I don't think they're going to follow prosecutorial directives towards corruption.
Well, Trump has very inexperienced people doing his bidding. I mean, Lindsay Halligan, for example, the interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, she used Signal earlier this month to communicate with Anna Bauer, journalist for Lawfare, about the criminal case she's pursuing against Letitia James. And it's so that there is the chance that it could be the prosecutors that end up being prosecuted, or removed from these cases, right? Because, Trump doesn't have access to good people anymore. I mean, nobody wants to work for him. And so this is part of the reason why he has to kind of resort to people who are inexperienced and who are former beauty pageant winners to actually take on these cases. No
shade on beauty pageant winners, some of whom are amazingly highly capable women.
I'm sure we've both won many in our past as well.
But it's true, when you're in a position where you can't find a prosecutor east of Missouri to bring these cases, and you got to fly some guy out from Missouri to do it, that's because you're doing stuff that most prosecutors know violates their ethical duty to do justice. I mean, prosecutors have a unique ethical duty. It is different from all other lawyers. It is their job to do justice. And so most prosecutors are not going to take a case this wildly dicey. The other thing I would say is most prosecutors understand that there are statutes governing the preservation of governmental records. And if you are a governmental official, like, say, a federal prosecutor, you can't use Signal's disappearing messages feature on your communications about a case. I mean, you can use it for a booty call, but you cannot use it on your communications about a case. So if in fact, as was reported in Lawfare, this prosecutor has disappearing messages turned on Signal, that's already a massive violation of the structures of law governing the way her role is to be carried out. Question is, who enforces that? You cannot have a right without a remedy. What that means is your rights only exist as long as there's somebody to enforce those rights. That's the big problem here, which is that we have essentially a cabal where no one is protecting the American people. Everybody is protecting each other.
And protecting Trump. Because his argument is that, he has been wronged. I mean, he's now seeking $230 million in damages from the DOJ because he claimed that, of the upset that he was caused when they kept indicting him and taking him to court for various things. And, this is an argument that he puts forward a lot, and his apologists put forward a lot, is, Biden's people, they were after him. You saw how many times he was in court. And it's like Trump's been in court his whole life. He's literally a career criminal. And, the law finally caught up with him. Eventually, all of these cases in the main were dismissed because of this law that prevents a sitting president from being prosecuted. But how do we explain to people who do think that this kind of lawfare, this kind of new popularized word, is being used and has been used against Donald Trump, and therefore he is within his rights to kind of go after people for it, when he has form, when he has spent a lifetime in court and losing invariably?
I mean, I think we have to take a little bit of a hard look at the way our legal system has actually operated up until now. And this is actually what I've been writing about. The reason I'm, have this book, The Price of Mercy, coming out is because I really wanted people to know what's actually happening inside criminal courts. It's very hard to say, all of these prosecutions are political now, when there's been a level on which, for many years, many prosecutions have been political. As long as you have elected prosecutors who have tough on crime platforms, who run promising to really crack down on some disfavored form of crime or another, most recently it was retail theft from chain pharmacies. As long as you have prosecutors performing political prosecution against ordinary people, it's very hard to argue that this is different and special in nature. Now, it is different and special in scale and in explicitness. Never before have we had a president, post his DM saying, this is my enemies list, please get on it. But I think we have to take a hard look at ourselves and acknowledge that this has been a country where politics has long informed prosecution. And some of our gravest miscarriages of justice have been carried out by prosecutors who were afraid of publicly admitting that they got something wrong, or afraid of not having someone to crack down on fast enough in a high profile case. So they just grab someone who's the wrong person and then double down. This is actually something really interesting about the Abrego Garcia case. In the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, it's very, very clear that he and his cohort of people with whom he was sent to prison in El Salvador were not what the government claimed. The government was doing what prosecutors have done many times before in this country, using really slipshod explanations of how to identify a gang member and picking up random Latino guys with tattoos like an autism tribute tattoo or like mom and dad tattoos, claiming they were gang members, assuming no one would question that claim, and getting them off to a torture prison as expeditiously as possible. Now, once it became really, really clear that the government got it wrong, once a heroic DOJ prosecutor admitted that they made a mistake, the government started cracking down on this one guy, this one random dad from Maryland, to try to prove that there was something very dangerous about him. Pure political prosecution, pure theater, right? because they don't want to seem wrong. They don't want to have the cracks in their reasoning, the cracks in that reasoning that applied to a whole cohort of people laid bare. And this is, again, at a very big, terrifying scale of audaciousness and naked corruption. You know, if the allegations of Mr. Abrego Garcia's team against the government are correct, it's a very, very scary level of political prosecution. But I can tell you that that type of thing, where the government has gotten the wrong person and then doubled down on them, has happened in every city, county, and town in America. Ask any public defender, and they will personally have had a case where the wrong person got arrested and the cops didn't want to admit it and the prosecutor didn't want to be embarrassed, so they took that case all the way to trial. And sometimes as defenders, we get our point through to the jury and we win and we save an innocent person from being a political victim. And sometimes we don't, because the political fervor that carried that prosecution forward is a political fervor that has also infected the neutrality of the jury pool. So basically, I think we have to recognize that this is terrifying and huge, but also that it's the growth of an American phenomenon, not the inception of something new.
Finally, let's talk about the kind of weirdest metaphor for Trump's presidency, and that is the desecration and destruction of the East Wing of the White House. Because as sad as it is to watch, and a lot of people who, you know, feel it's the people's house feel very personally aggrieved that this has been done without any planning permission. He's not gone via the proper authorities to do this, because, of course, you know, he is the supreme ruler of all of America, and everybody answers to him, including planning officials. What this is doing for his big, beautiful ballroom is really a metaphor for his destruction of the country and his contempt for the system. I mean, I thought initially that because he's been fighting planners his entire life as a builder, that he finally was like, well, I'm the president now and I don't need to seek planning permission and they can come after me, it doesn't matter. But then I also had a thought that because the East Wing traditionally has been the home of the First Lady and the offices of the First Lady, that it was also a kind of two fingers up to Melania as well. That in some way he was kind of getting back at the fact that she doesn't love him, or she isn't showing him the gratitude that he feels he deserves. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into kind of the marital, the psychology of that marriage, but there's a lot at work. There's a lot at play here, isn't there? This goes beyond the corruption of having these private investors pay for what was supposed to be 100 million, then 200 million, then 250 million this week. I heard him say 300 million in the Oval Office yesterday. And then a couple of days ago, there was also the mention of 400 million. I mean, the price of this ballroom seems to increase depending on how many people want to curry favor with this regime by paying for it.
Yeah, it's just like a contractor, right? To keep jacking the price up, the more they find there's might be money on the table. No,
right.
I'm kidding.
Not that he's going to pay the contractor, of course. We've got all that to come.
I'm saying that he's like a bad contractor. No, yeah. First of all, let's not assume that Melania even wants to be in the East Wing. Like, as far as I can tell, that girl wants to be home in New York, and she wants nothing to do with any of this.
Yes.
I'm not sure how attached she was to the East Wing, but the rest of us were. And that's actually the shocking thing that I'm feeling and seeing in people around me. I didn't know I cared about the White House, qua White House. Like, I didn't know that when they said this is the people's house, that I actually did feel a sense of personal ownership of our national heritage. I mean, I guess I should have realized it because whenever Hollywood wants to really shock the audience, they blow up the White House.
Yeah.
But the emotional impact of seeing it torn to shreds with rebar hanging out and everything turned gray by the dust of crushed concrete was so horrifying. And I feel like a lot of people have shared that reaction. And obviously, you know, sometimes this doesn't make it to the top of the news cycle because it's not the most important story. It's not the most violent or scary story.
But it's symbolic.
It's symbolic. And also it's symbolic because it's not just, a cutting of red tape. Like, the president can do this. There's some forms. He didn't fill out the forms. No, that building, as I understand it, is in the custody of the National Park Service. Mm-hmm. It does not belong to him. It is currently where he is allowed by his office to reside. This is a little bit like if I worked at Citibank and I slept under my desk, that wouldn't make Citibank my building.
Yeah.
So it's really watching someone, because he has the brute force and power, destroy someone else's house. Not to mention the fact that there's four, as I understand it, beyond the Parks Commission, there's 4 levels of authority and approval that are necessary to make modifications to the White House or to any part of the National Mall. Past presidents have sought the appropriate permissions, and those permissions go through historical authorities as well as a fine arts review, because maintaining the beauty, the historic beauty of this symbol of our nation is really important. And just from a completely personal aesthetic perspective, putting like a monstrous hotel ballroom that looks like Motel 6 and LaGuardia Airport had a baby
right
next to this icon of American power in the world is horrifying. So there's many levels. It's an affront. It's another assault. It's a theft. It is a theft from the American people. He has stolen and destroyed a part of our heritage.
Is it actually potentially quite useful? Because he lied and said that this building wouldn't be touching the old building and that there would be no demolition. He said that just a couple of weeks ago, and people are putting the videos side by side so that you can see the falsification. But what that does is it maybe opens up conversations in Republican households about the fact that he promised one thing and is doing something else, about something that is actually quite bipartisan in nature.
I am not super optimistic about that. And I'll tell you why, which is that
I'm clutching at straws.
I know, but there are other things that okay, so we want to talk about what's going to open up conversations in Republican households. I don't think it's going to be the ballroom, because I think it's very easy to take the perspective that he cut through some red tape. And honestly, when someone says to you, hey, when the White House wants to have big events, they have to set up a tent outside in DC, which the weather in DC is like it's a swamp that freezes. Yeah. So I do get the perspective, like he's making an improvement, and he didn't cost anything to the taxpayers. He funded it all through private dollars. Nobody's sitting there thinking what that private funding means. Oh, we gave private companies a way to literally buy the favor of the executive branch. Like that. Right. But that conversation is not the one that's going to happen. The one that's going to happen, in my opinion, is that as zero soybeans are sold, and as cattle ranchers experience, as always, a tough market. I mean, I grew up in a cattle ranching community, and watching the death of family ranches and the takeover by factory farming and big meatpacking middlemen has been economically devastating and personally devastating. For those agricultural professionals who believed in him and voted for him, to watch him turn around, bail out Argentina, and then watch Argentina compete for our agricultural contracts, and moreover, have the president endorse the idea of Americans buying Argentine beef instead of beef from here, from Wyoming, from Colorado, from our Midwest and Western regions. That is the real slap in the face, because that's a slap in the pocketbook. And it's also not one that you can find an alternative justification for. You can argue that we need a ballroom. I don't think we need a ballroom. I think that particular ballroom is hideous, but some people could argue that. You can't argue that we need Argentine beef or that we need to bail out Argentina. Like, these are not arguments that read to Americans.
Well, there's a level of betrayal there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because 22 odd billion for Argentina, when the government is currently shut down, is a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of people, not least federal workers, but people in any industry where they are being affected by this. And there's no sign that they're gonna come to any agreement in Congress over this shutdown.
Oh, being told as an American, I'm so sorry, your health insurance premiums are just going to double because we can't afford to make them not double, but we can afford to bail out Argentina, build a huge ballroom, have a $400 million Qatari plane that, you, the taxpayers, don't get to keep, but you have to pay for the upgrades on. We don't have the money to possibly continue Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid programs you've been paying into for your entire career. But we have the money to spend on unlimited ICE detention. There was a reporting this week in the media about ICE's weapons purchases, which included, they say chemical weapons. I know that they mean like pepper balls, of course, but also missile warheads. Yeah. Like, we have unlimited money for pet projects and foreign bailouts, but we don't have the money to give you back what you paid into the Social Security system. Like, that's not an argument that works with any stripe of American.
And also, I suppose, just finally, the rhetoric that, we are becoming so rich, Trump says. He talks about 13 trillion was the number that he used recently to describe the investments that were coming into the United States. Of course, it's a complete lie. There is no evidence of this. And some of us are starting to say, well, maybe he needs to show the evidence of this because maybe he's been stealing this money. I mean, there is a suggestion that the corruption is becoming so exposed just by nature of his inability to tell the truth, not least claiming we are rich when people are struggling more than ever now. I mean, people have stopped paying their bills and no one's really talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a while for economic effects to hit.
Yeah.
And we've been experiencing, the reason so many people were frustrated during the Biden administration was actually, this is what I've been reading about in Gene Ludwig's work, our unemployment numbers. When we look at how many Americans are unemployed, our official unemployment numbers count people as employed who have worked only 1 hour that week.
Yeah.
But when we look at the median wage of a profession, we only measure people who are employed full-time in that profession, which means that for the vast swaths of people who are part-time or seasonal workers, their wage isn't considered as part of the median. So we are overestimating how much money people are making, and we are underestimating how much unemployment we have. The real figures, as estimated in this book, is closer to a quarter of Americans being functionally unemployed or so underemployed that they are functionally unemployed at any given time.
And not forgetting the minimum wage is about $7.
And that money doesn't go nearly as far as it used to. When we look at inflation numbers, when we look at the price of goods, we're not emphasizing the goods people need the most. We're not prioritizing the gallon of milk over the yacht when we look at how the price of goods changes. So when the price of goods in the sector that people need the most, like groceries, goes up, our national data on this is not really accounting for that. So even under a democratic regime, you're seeing a fundamental misunderstanding by the people in power of what ordinary Americans are actually experiencing, because the way we calculate our data relating to personal family economics is deeply flawed. This administration obviously has made economic choices that are the equivalent of lighting the East Wing on fire. I mean, it's like really, really terrible for ordinary families. People are going to see that hitting now. And I think when you talk about demanding to see the proof, when Trump says $13 trillion of investments are coming, at a certain point, I think all of these people are going to be asking for the receipts. You said you were going to give me X. I do not have X. I am worse off than I was before. Where's your plan? Where's your proof of that plan? Maybe we're going to enter a moment where Americans have a much healthier relationship with questioning political claims and demanding to see detailed plans and proofs rather than slogans and aspersions on the other side.
Yeah. And it makes perfect sense as to why he fires the statisticians and takes control of the supply of information. It's, what's bearing out now, I think, is becoming more and more obvious to more and more people. And I just hope that the energy for the protesting and documenting it, the capturing of these events on video, I think plays a huge part in holding this regime to account. We have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you, as always, Emily Galvin Almanza. Thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.